Hello everyone and welcome to another video here on White Coats and Corgis. Today I'm going to be showing you a clip from the Premed experience, which is a live virtual event that I put together for Premeds to learn all about the admissions process, the MCAT, how to get their extracurriculars, and all things like that. I was so lucky to get 3 amazing medical school deans to volunteer to participate in the event. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Hey everyone, and thanks so much for joining. My name's Dan, and I am a second-year internal medicine resident, and I'll be the moderator for this panel. We're joined by 3 incredible deans and admissions experts here, and I want to give everyone the chance to ask questions in that Q&A, and I'll be looking through that. But first, I was hoping that the deans could introduce themselves. We can go one by one and just quickly sort of say where you're from and what your role is. So if we can start with Dr. Osborne.
Hello, I'm Megan Boysen Osborne. I am the Associate Dean for Students, so I oversee admissions, student affairs, and diversity, equity, and inclusion at University of California, Irvine.
Awesome. Dr. Liotta.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm Rob Liotta, and I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions and Recruitment at the Uniformed Services University, the Health Sciences, and we're actually on the Walter Reed Bethesda Medical Campus, the National Naval Medical Center, Bethesda. So, and I'm great to be here with you today.
And Dr. Amiri.
Hi, everyone. I'm Layla Amiri. I'm the Associate Dean for Admissions at the Robert Larner College of Medicine at the University of Vermont.
You know, something else that stresses people out, stressed me out too, when I was applying was writing a personal statement. And Dr. Amiri, Rinka here asks a particular question about personal statements, but I was hoping you could expand upon it too. When she asks, for medical school personal statements, I was told to write it as a sort of term essay instead of a narrative where I list out reasons why I'm qualified as a med student. Is this true? Or, you know, what recommendations would you give when someone's writing a personal statement? And what have you seen in the best ones?
So you're going to get as many pieces of advice and different types of advice with as many people that you talk to, because we're going to look for different things. In my mind, if you revisit the things that you've done, you've wasted your space, because we already have an experiences section where you've talked about the things that you've done. So revisiting the things that you've done is, in my mind, not helpful. Also, telling me why you're qualified to be a physician is not helpful, because leave that to us in our admissions committees, right? You have assumptions on what makes you qualified, and those may not fit the model that all the different schools have. Allow us to make that determination. An ideal personal statement for me is one that you could, find someone out on the street, give them, 10 or 20. It used to be $5 when I started doing this work, but with inflation, give them $20 so they can have a couple of cups of coffee. Have them read the statement and then see if they come back with the essence of why this is what you must do, that nothing else will work, right? If they come back with that, then that's the personal statement. So I want to understand why it must be medicine just as much as your parents, your significant other, your sister, your brother, and your advisor knows. That's what the point of the personal statement is in my mind, is for me to understand why this has to be where you're going. So I find those personal statements that outline the qualities of a good physician not helpful, and particularly because, committees have different personalities, and depending on how many people are there, who's going to feel uncomfortable about what you've indicated is a, characteristic of a physician. So I think if you can just share with us heart to heart why this is where you need to be, that would be fantastic. It doesn't have to be an exercise in creative writing. It doesn't have to start with, thunder and lightning and, people clutching their chest either. It can be just a very mellow, just again, open heart to heart description of why medicine is your calling. And for many of you, it may not be, it was an instantaneous thing. It may be something that has, grown over time. We heard about traditional applicants, and I completely agree with Dr. Liotta. Traditional, non-traditional applicants, are the cream of the crop as far as I'm concerned as well, because there's a life there that they've lived, and they've done something that hasn't been their calling. And so that's what, in my mind, that's where the personal statement should be. And don't use Chat GPT. I was waiting for this to come up, so it didn't come up, and we're halfway through, so I had to bring it up. Don't use ChatGPT. It's probably going to write a pretty decent essay for you. But as we begin to filter through this type of, technology that's available to us, it should really be your words. Nothing is more unsettling for me anyway, as an admissions dean, is when a student comes in to interview and they sound and feel different than what that essay sounded and felt like. So the essay should be reflective of you. Think about a good book that you've read. You kind of have a sense of who that author is, right? If you meet them in person, kind of have an expectation of how they'll be. That's what I would love to read. I want to be breathless and dying to meet you when I'm done reading your personal statement.
Wow. I really actually want to stay on this topic because personal statements they're really challenging to sit down and start writing. And, I've heard even the first draft that you write will look nothing like your final draft, maybe. So Dr. Liotta, I want to ask you next and then Dr. Osborne after. What are your thoughts on personal statements and what advice would you give? Because I think it's just such an important topic.
Yeah, I completely agree with the answers that you've already just heard is fantastic. And I would say it's personal. It's your why. It's your why for medicine. And what makes it unique is it's your story, right? You're going to have a unique, precious, and unrepeatable story. And that's what we get from that personal statement. And it may be, what happened in your life or when you first had those inklings, you're sharing that person, that depth of thought. It's not just, I want to help people, like a superficial line. It's like, well, how do you know that? And then so tell me a story why you know that. And that is that's where I think it's you can convey you'll say the thought, I want to serve people. Great. How do you know that? And I think the best way to do that is to tell that story or to tell a story in your life that actually supports that concept, or a struggle that actually then saw how you learned that or someone got you through that. And so that's why it's a unique personal statement. It will be unique to you. But I love reading those, some of the ones they're powerful. In fact, this is one, and I share, I remember it was a cyclist who had been, he was training with his buddy for several months, and they're in the middle of they're in the mountains phase, and he crashes 10 miles into it, and it's like a 150-mile bike ride, and he's with his buddy. He looks up, he's got 2 teeth in his hand. He broke his collarbone, and he's like, "Did I still go for this?" And he did. He finished the race, right? And so, but I was like, but it still struck with me because I'm like, man, this is someone dedicated, and they were sort of putting that in hey, I've had these challenges, but I'm going to work for this, and I really want this. And I was like, gosh, that's who I want on my team, or in my group, when there's something pops up and I need help, they're not going to shy away from that. So now other deans may say, well, that was not a smart, you should have went to the hospital. So, everyone's going to look at it differently, well, that may not have been a good decision, but I think just share the story and it's real to you and it will resonate, when you get that.
That's quite the story. And Dr. Osborne, do you have any sort of stories about personal statements you've read that have really stuck out to you too, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think a good personal statement is something that can kind of reflect on an experience. I like Dr. Amiri was saying, it doesn't have to, don't go for Hollywood knocking my socks off in that first paragraph, unless you have a Hollywood knock my socks off story, but don't try to create one if you don't have one. And so I don't need you to talk about how, you cured cancer 5 years ago or something like that. I want to hear about you, and I want to hear about why medicine, like they said. The opening intro, again, doesn't have to be narratively gorgeous. I would just tell me why you want to be a physician. However, if you are going to tell me a story, I want to hear a reflection. And so I would recommend that everybody start journaling in their clinical experiences and think about days that you had where you felt icky, or where you felt really uncomfortable, or you saw something that was good, or you saw something that was negative. And I can think of so many experiences from my training where I had a pit in my stomach and I wanted to escape into the fire escape. And it was so uncomfortable. But in those moments, I really figured out something about me, something about medicine, something about what my patient deserves. For example, I had an experience one time where we didn't have an interpreter for a patient, and there was a huge miscommunication. And it was when I was a fourth year student, and I just remember feeling so sick in that moment. How am I going to solve this problem? But as a fourth year medical student, I was able to solve it. I got an interpreter, and we resolved the conflict. And I realized in that moment, patients deserve to have their spoken language, their native language spoken to them every single time they're in a clinical healthcare setting. And so that was like a revelation that I had as a fourth year medical student. And so if you can write about something like that you saw or witnessed in your clinical experiences, I would love to hear about that. I'll tell you some things that I hear about a lot, and it doesn't mean you can't write about this, but these are two things that we often make a joke at the admissions committee of, okay, well, this was this personal statement. So number one, I hear about grandparents a lot, and that doesn't mean that it wasn't very impactful to you, but just know that I hear about a lot of grandparents in personal statements. So just know that. And if you want to write about that, obviously it's not off the table, but it happens a lot. And then number two, this is a little naive to me when people write about this. They write about how they were diagnosing their friends with ear infections since they were 5 years old. And that's cute, but I hear that a lot also. And I guarantee that you can't know that you want to be a physician when you're 5 years old. It's a very complicated career. And so I want to hear about why now you want to be a physician, not why when you were 5 years old you want to be a physician.
And if Dr. Dan, if I could just add one thing, applying to the health profession, so, medical school, dental school, pharmacy school, we require a personal statement. And you don't have to have a personal statement for why you want to be a historian, for example, right? And so I think as you're thinking about the fact that we require this personal statement, it's so important to us, understand why it's so important for us and the privilege that exists in this role, right? And the vulnerability that you're dealing with, which is exactly what I feel Dr. Osborne was speaking about right now. So think about what you can tell us that is, again, your unique and precious story, as Dr. Leota mentioned, that captures who you are and why we're asking you to write this. Because what does that have anything to do with your ability to do the work? That's what the personal statement has to give us.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. And that's kind of why I wanted to chat about it so much, because it's really a chance for somebody to go beyond just the numbers and activities and to express who they are as a medical school applicant and candidate. So thank you for all of those answers. Dr. Amiri, while we talk about that too, a lot of what we've said so far has been sort of geared towards students who are close to applying to medical school. But, sometimes people realize when they're in high school that they want to become physicians. And, I know we have some people here listening in who are in high school or are just starting out in college and know that in a few years they want to be applying to medical school. So how can they prepare in advance to become successful applicants in the future?